mentioned that.
Welcome, Abhiyanshi.
So may
Thank
we
you.
start? Yes. Hi everyone, good evening from Dhaka, Bangladesh. It's a late good evening. So welcome to the second session of today, second last session actually. And yesterday, just to give you a brief, that yesterday we have kicked off the South Asian Resilience Hub. And this year we are going to have a series, good number of sessions happening over the week. You may find the session details in our register link. You can get it from our ECAT website. I will shortly drop down the website address in the chat box. And with that, I would like to actually welcome everyone to today's session on local adaptation to extreme heat emerging perspective, organized by All India Disaster Management Institute. So I will now hand over the floor to Sushma ji.
Thank you so much, Vera. Good evening, everyone. I hope you all can hear me and are doing well today. I'm delighted to welcome you today to today's panel discussion organized by ECAT South Asia Resilience Hub and hosted by All India Disaster Mitigation Institute. Our focus today is on pressing issue of local adaptation to extreme heat, emerging perspectives. As climate change continues to escalate, leading to more frequent and severe heat waves, it is vital that we explore how local communities are adapting and strengthening their resilience to meet these growing challenges. The ILO estimates that by 2030, productivity losses due to heat stress could result to a 2.2% reduction in total working hours worldwide, particularly affecting the sectors like agriculture and construction, where outdoor labor is essential. These losses are expected to hit the poorest regions the hardest, further increasing inequality. Today, we are fortunate to have an esteemed group of experts with us who bring us a wealth of knowledge from respective fields. Our discussion will delve into following topics, precisely innovative strategies and solutions for extreme heat adaptation, policy frameworks for local adaptation, the role of community-based initiatives, lessons learned from the field, and challenges and emerging opportunities for resilience and building. Before we dive into the discussion, I'll briefly introduce the panelists. Please correct me if I'm wrong somewhere. Mr. Mehul Pandya, he's a project coordinator at AIDMI. He brings over 2 decades of experience in humanitarian and climate change adaptation work across India and South Asia. His expertise spans training, research, and program evaluation of NGOs, government bodies, and CSR projects. Dr. Rajvi Joshipura, who is from SEVA, a physician and advocate from Climate Action. Dr. Joshipura has been instrumental in implementing the extreme heat income microinsurance, which aims to mitigate health and livelihood impacts of climate change, particularly on vulnerable population. Then is Mr. Abhiyan Tiwari. He is a lead climate resilience and health consultant at NRDC India. Mr. Tiwari focuses on public health risks posed by environmental, climate, and disaster challenges, and works to promote evidence-based adaptation and mitigation policies. Mr. Vishal Pathak is a project coordinator at All India Disaster Mitigation Institute, who is actively engaged in policy support, training, capacity building, and knowledge sharing in disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation. Mr. Khyal Trivedi is a project lead from the Humanitarian Observatory Initiative for South Asia. His work facilitates important conversations around extreme heat, climate adaptation, and conflict management. And finally, I'm Sushma. I will be moderating today's discussion. I've recently completed my master's from the London School of Economics, and I work with All India Disaster Mitigation Institute on a range of topics, including disaster risk reduction, women in agriculture, and climate smart agriculture in rural settings. As the sequence for today's discussion, we will begin with remarks from Mr. Mehul Pandya from AIDMI. Following that, we'll hear from our distinguished experts, starting from Dr. Rajvi Joshipura from SEVA, then Mr. Vishal Pathak from All India Disaster Mitigation Institute, then Mr. Khyal Trivedi, and then on to Mr. Abhiyan Tiwari from NRDC India. And after the panel presentations, we will move into a Q&A session to engage with your questions, and then we'll conclude with final thoughts from Mr. Pandya. The timing for this meeting is 1.5 hours, that is until 5:30 p.m. So we all take care of the time. And for everyone's information, the meeting is recorded live. And with that, I think let's begin our discussion. And I look forward to hearing from our all panelists and engaging with all of you as we explore how communities can adapt to the growing challenges of extreme heat. Over to you, Mr. Mehul, for opening points.
No, thank you, Susma ji, for the wonderful introduction.
And good evening, everyone. And thank you so much for giving me and my organization the opportunity to deliver today's keynote address. Uh, my name is Mehul Pandya, and I work with the All India Disaster Mitigation Institute, which is based in Ahmedabad, India. And primary focus of my institute is on leveraging capacities and facilitating the exchange of risk reduction strategies, ideas, and solutions. We are also focusing on promoting the rights of disaster affected victims and providing timely and targeted relief to disaster affected communities in a gender sensitive ways. And we are also devising climate change adaptation and mitigation approaches in the community context and supporting the same in the regional networks. So these are three focus areas that my organization works with. And in India, my organization has covered over 9 types of disasters, and it has worked across 65 cities, 86 districts, and 18 states of India so far. And my organization also works in neighboring countries such as Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, and Sri Lanka. That is, of course, on demand basis. And the All India Disaster Mitigation Institute, AIDMI, has been working on the issues of extreme heat mitigation over a decade now. And so many of you who are participating in today's session may have also contributed to our work in various capacities in the past. And today we are going to discuss the extreme heat scenario in South Asia region and what could be done about it. So just to give you a brief background, South Asia is experiencing a drastic surge in heat waves, posing severe threats to human health, ecosystems, and our economies. And it is almost certain that without action, South Asia will face more frequent and more intense heat waves due to climate change. And just to give you a few examples, in 2015 alone, in India and Pakistan, heat waves claimed more than 4,000 lives. And these extreme heat events exhibit existing health conditions and disproportionately affect the vulnerable populations. And heat waves can also have a devastating impact on various sectors of our economy, such as agriculture. Extreme heat also reduce labor productivity and strain our energy infrastructure, leading to significant economic losses. And one of the World Bank studies has estimated that rising heat can put 4.5 percentage of India's GDP at risk by 2030, which is quite serious. So I think in today's session, we'll be hearing from various panelists about various aspects of heat wave mitigation and management. But at the onset, I would like to highlight 5 central or critical areas or issues surrounding heat wave mitigation and management in South Asia region. And these 5 critical areas of issues have emerged from our own work and work with our partners across South Asia region and in India. So the first point that I would like to highlight is about we need to be more careful about extreme heat and urbanization. And as we know that as cities grow and develop, they tend to trap more heat, which leads to significantly higher temperatures in urban areas compared to surrounding rural areas. But what is even more concerning is the emergence of intra-urban heat island effect. Pockets of extreme heat within a city itself. And to support this argument with evidence, I would like to share, some findings of a recent research done in India by the Indian Space Research Organization (ISRO). The study was conducted in the city of Ahmedabad itself, and it has revealed some alarming trends about those intra-urban heat island effects in the city. The study reported significant temperature variations. I underline the temperature variations and differences of up to 2.5 degrees Celsius within a meter, within a mere 10 kilometers of range. in Ahmedabad central region. And the study also reported areas with higher vegetation, water bodies, and even barren land much cooler. So these findings are more than just a reference point or data points for us, but they have real world consequences for cities like Ahmedabad, but also in neighboring countries, in cities like Dhaka, Islamabad, and Colombo, where similar studies would probably reveal similar results. So we know that extreme heat exposure increases risk of heat stroke, respiratory problems, and other heat-related illnesses, and it will put vulnerable population at a greater risk in our cities. And the one more study is confirming what other studies have found. The second issue that I would like to share with you all today is about the demand side of heat wave mitigation and management. And this is something that we have experienced in our own work, that our responses have always been on the supply side. But now we need to examine the demand side more carefully, especially when we have limited resources and capacities. By demand side, what I mean is that we need to understand what do extreme heat or heat wave affected victims want. What what type of services or products are they willing to pay? And is there a demand for measures like extreme heat insurance, for example? So all these questions we must explore, and we need to find solutions to improve the overall response to heat wave risk mitigation and management with participation of communities and also the private sector. So that was the second issue that I wanted to share with you. The third issue that I would like to highlight that concerns all of us is about gender. And it is well recognized that women are more and differently affected by various disasters and extreme events. However, we must understand that not all women are equally affected. And that is why we must incorporate the lens of intersectionality analysis in our assessment, planning, and responses. The fourth point that I would like to discuss with you all is about the importance of heatwave preparedness plans, but at the local level, because temperatures vary from place to place. And it is crucial that whatever plans, heatwave preparedness plans that we are preparing or generating, are adapted according to the local conditions and local needs. And once these plans are put in place, we must also ensure that they are sufficiently financed. It is also equally important. Fifth, last but not the least, I wanted to share with you uh, a very important point, and it is about the anticipatory action. And we must ensure that all our actions uh, are well prepared. And in case of heat waves, the window for anticipatory action is really small. I mean, those who are in the response sector or departments, they understand this quite well, that the window for anticipatory action, especially for heat waves, in comparison with some other slow onset disasters, is really small. And that's why authorities and CSOs must work closely with communities in advance to ensure the responses are timely and relevant to the local needs. So these are the five issues or concerns that I wanted to share with you in the beginning. And with this, I end my keynote address and wish you all the best, all the panelists and participants. Thank you. Over to you, Sushma ji.
Thank you so much, Mehul. I think it was an interesting, I think the points you mentioned, especially about gender and intersectionality and anticipatory actions, I think those are the driving forces at this point on why it is more important to kind of have niche when it comes to certain climate disasters, and we cannot just have a big plan in place. Uh, I would go to Dr. Rajvi Joshipura from SEWA.
Namaste and greetings to everyone. I am Dr. Rajvi Joshipura and have been a part of Seva for past more than 4 or 5 years. And today I would like to discuss a little about the impacts of extreme heat on the informal sector women and what are the couple of interventions they have been doing or are presently accepted so that which helps them build their resilience in a longer duration of time. So basically, SEVA was established in 1972 and is a national trade union of about 2.9 million women members across 18 states and 7 South Asian countries. And our two broad goals are full employment and self-reliance. And to achieve its goals with an integrated approach to each and every upcoming challenge, the four key pillars with which we function are organizing, that is for building the collective strength, capacity building, so that members stand firm in the competitive market, capital formation for risk mitigation and fighting poverty, and last but not the least is the social security to enhance their well-being and productivity. So we are all aware that the climate shocks and their intensity have been increasing gradually over the past couple of years. So these worsening impacts are becoming evident with the worst sufferers being the poor. And the informal sector women workers are disproportionately impacted but are ill prepared to handle such shocks because they don't have access to adequate resources. Hence, on the occasion of our 50th anniversary in 2022, our members collectively resolved to focus on climate action as their theme towards all the activities going further. And hence we launched the Building Clean Skies campaign which we call the Swachh Akash campaign. And it is presently being executed through series of activities which include building climate resilience, adaptation and mitigation initiatives at grassroots levels. So recently, a survey was conducted with about 600 members spread across 8 various trades in India. And we are all aware that climate change impacts various aspects of their life. So it is not only health and livelihood, but multiple others. So here I have some numbers to discuss. One of it is that the first question we asked was that does heat wave or extreme heat impact your livelihood? To which about 90% members said yes, which was further broken down into asking them why. So 79% responded saying that their work efficiency reduced. 64% said that work hours decrease. 44% said that expenses increase. And 43% said that the work days for which they are functional reduced because of medical expenses. So very often members say that they are not able to work under direct exposure of heat for reason being that what happens is that they feel dizzy, they feel nauseous, they are not able to function well. So hence their work efficiency decreases. In addition to this, we asked that what are the other challenges, to which 69% said that it was direct heat exposure. 48% said that they didn't have adequate access to water and hence they used to get dehydrated and could not work. And 31% members did not have access to shaded break stations. The next aspect that we focused on was health. So about 90% members responded that their health does get adversely impacted. The 5 key symptoms that they face were headaches, skin rashes, fever, dizziness, diarrhea, vomiting. And because of increased and disproportionate burden of caregiving responsibilities, managing their household chores, or getting raw materials or resources required to manage their daily expenses. About 38% members said that it adversely impacts their mental health. In addition to it, during various focus group discussions, it was also highlighted that several women members are often susceptible to gender-based violence because of these impacts on their livelihoods and health. So the impact of heat waves on food and water security was also another thing that was highlighted. 60% members reported spoilage and 82%
5টা বেজে গেছে কেমনে ভাই?
and 82% members stated that the water supply was adversely impacted. So very often what happens is that the food and water security when they get hampered, members fall into a vicious cycle of malnutrition and hence not being able to meet their basic goals. And the last thing that was getting impacted was electricity. The reason being that the cooling demand increased. But because of lack of resources, 78% members said that the electricity supply often gets impacted. There are frequent power outages, and 95% stated that the electricity consumption increases. So, based on these survey findings, various interventions spread across multiple areas have been undertaken. Immediate response that as of now we have in terms of health is setting up of health camps, increasing members' access to immediate care, be it via telemedicine or by organizing camps at local level. But then there are some longer term interventions, for example, the Green Village intervention. So the Green Village intervention has been in place with a multifold goal. For the first one is that increasing preparedness. The second one is to rebuild livelihood in terms of any given climate shock, be it extreme heat or floods or excessive rainfall. What happens is that we might see that the climate shock impacted members for 2, 3, 4 consecutive calendar days. But what happens is their livelihoods are hampered, their savings get drained, their assets are lost. So what happened? The impact is for about say 3 to 4 consecutive months altogether. Hence, there is a dire need to rebuild on their livelihoods. And last is that increase financial stability and resilience. So the Haryali, as in the Green Village intervention, has been in place to improve access to clean energy in remote areas. And this is being achieved by advocating for comprehensive energy policies and implementing scalable market solutions which are tailored and curated according to the local needs. The primary goal is to have a holistic approach to energy policies, and through these interventions, what SEWA does is promotes their transition, which is easy towards switching from green and energy efficient solutions, which include solar lamps, EESL kits, school roofs, biogas plants, solar pumps, solar trap light, precision irrigation, rainwater harvesting, energy farming, and electric mobility. So, in addition to having a direct impact on their livelihoods, it also serves multifold, like it also helps them minimize their daily needs or meet their regular energy requirements or has health impacts. For example, members switching to e-mobility or solar lights. Currently, there are 150 villages across multiple states that have been converted into green villages. The next intervention I would like to highlight is the climate parametric insurance. So the product contours are as follows, that the product is structured to pay out multiple times within a year with an average payout of $3.5 per day. So the only parameter that was considered in 2023 and 2024 is the maximum daily temperature, and the payouts are structured in a manner that they will directly get deposited to the member's account if the temperature exceed a given trigger for 2 or more consecutive days. So the product was originally designed in 2023 and was scaled up in 2024 with inputs from members and grassroots leaders, as SEWA is an organization which functions with a bottoms-up approach. So in 2023, we had 21,000 members across 8 states, which was scaled up to 50,000 members in 2024. The district covered in 2023 were 5, and then we scaled up to 22 districts spread across 4 states this time. In addition to providing members with access to micro insurance, in 2023, another additional feature to this was procurement of climate adaptation interventions like solar lanterns, tarpaulin sheets, water jugs, and umbrellas. And the coverage period was from 5th May to 30th of June. But this year, that is in 2024, instead of having climate adaptation interventions in place, members were provided with cash assistance. So In all the given interventions, once the temperature crosses 40 degrees Celsius, all the members enrolled received a cash assistance of INR 400. And the coverage period was from 9th of April to 31st of March 2025. So the product lasts for a year. So the key outcomes are that we so far have received from this product are that it ensured provision of financial and safety nets to the member. Second was very often we have seen that there are a lot of households wherein male members are the decision makers in terms of finances. But this product ensured that women members also have access to financial security and are included in getting access to these services. For example, the program ensured 17,000 members getting access to the banking services. So it included opening new bank accounts or activating their dormant accounts. Additionally, the payouts that were made this year also ensure that members get flexibility to decide on where they want to spend the money, be it for their medical treatment or buying food or children's education. And some of the members also stated that they used it towards paying off their installments for debt. And it also ensured improved livelihoods. For example, the climate adaptation measures that were in place last year, like tarpaulin sheets or umbrellas or lanterns, they increased members' productivity by 15 to 25%. But the lessons that we learned are the product last year didn't trigger, although it triggered this year. But there have to be multiple parameters in place, which include humidity, nighttime temperature, bulb temperature, in addition to having maximum daytime temperature. Additionally, there is a need to have a comprehensive climate catastrophic insurance, which not only covers heat but also other climate shocks like excessive rainfall, cyclones, floods. The next one is the payouts need to be immediate, because what happens is members need help which is immediate. They cannot keep on relying for someone to come help them for months or weeks together, and hence the parametric insurance. That is the difference between having the traditional versus, that is the indemnity, versus parametric insurance, that the help needs to be immediate. Information mismatch in the product design. For example, sometimes what happens is because of the complex insurance policy wording and limited communication on inclusion and exclusions, marginal sector members often don't know what are the exact product contours, which need to be clearly communicated. So when we were having the focus group discussion after the product got triggered this year, our members said that we are daily wage workers and I am a sole breadwinner in my family. So during the days of extreme heat, what happens is that my work hours decrease, which leads to decreased income. And managing basic expenses like food for my family, children's education becomes very difficult, and I'm forced to use the money out of my savings. And this is the case in most of the women members' household, that their husbands want to spend that money towards their expenses. For example, in case of Hasina Bibi, who is a home-based worker from Ahmedabad, stated that it was for alcohol abuse. But this year, when she got the payout, she got to decide that where she wants to use it, and she used it towards buying books and pay school fees for her children. So the way forward, that going down the lane, the product does hold a value and will continue adding to helping members adapt or build resilience towards climate shocks, if at all. If we try to cover more number of members, more geographies, more traits, but in addition to that, have a forecast based algorithm for pre-event payouts. Additionally, bundling product, for example, integrating it with health insurance or crop insurance, cattle insurance, accidental insurance will also help, or clubbing the product with micro pension or contingent loan of credits. Additionally, we can also promote cross-fertilization and risk sharing, because in addition to have the value and driving that behavioral change, there needs to be something substantial. Second is that consider premium rebates, premium credits for years which are claim free. It is totally understandable that going down the lane, the heat waves are going to increase. But as I mentioned before, that there needs to be consideration of multiple parameters. And hence, having these premium rebates, premium credits will ensure adding that value base in the years that the product does not get triggered. Or we can use those funds towards having adaptation assistance programs in place. And last is increasing access to technology. These insurance products can also be bundled with helping members or enabling them to get access to green technologies like biodigesters, precision irrigation, and upskill them to use the same. This is where I would like to hand over the mic back to Sushma ji. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Joshipura. I think it was very, very interesting, especially when you kind of provide evidence and learnings. I think data backup is needed in today's world, and especially at grassroots level. And from the intervention and the instrument, and so also the Green Village Initiative, what we see is that there are not just immediate impacts to health, but also impacts to the children, to the household economy in long run, and how they would proceed further after such shock that has come. And that is what I think the Green Village intervention identifies. So thank you so much. I think I have a couple of questions, but I'll wait for the Q&A rounds. I'll hand over it to Vishal, sir. Mr. Vishal Pathak from IIT Madras.
Thank you so much. Hope able to hear and see the screen. Okay, thank you so much. It's really interesting to hear very, deep, rich experience while working with women by Seva. Thank you. So this presentation now is further narrowing down that with focus on small businesses and how extreme heat is affecting and what are the adaptation that they themselves are taking. Very briefly about AIDMI, as already shared in the beginning by Mehul Bhai, that AIDMI is highly emphasizing on extreme heat and related adaptation and mitigation measures. Basically, we promoting and strengthening the convergence of humanitarian action, disaster risk reduction, and climate change adaptation. And within that, so far, AIDMI cover responses to 18 types of disaster, and that includes extreme heat more and more. In fact, AIDMI is one of key agency in India who, started addressing extreme heat issues. And while working in SREX report of IPCC, developing case studies. So here, we would like to, within extreme heat, with more focus on small businesses. And we all know that how small businesses are important. On one side, they are vulnerable in terms of having high exposure to different disaster, different, also about social economic situation, poverty issues, and that. On the other side, their contribution is high in terms of development, in terms of employment. And not only that, during the normal scenario, but also during the emergency period, response and preparedness, they are really, highly contributing with silent features, especially in the local economic recovery in post-disaster. So this is our learning. So they are our leaders from where we learn a lot. They are our experts who, demonstrating different adaptation and mitigation measures with ground touch experience, a real one. And they are our pioneers because they are the, first responding to extreme heat. They may know, they may not know, but they are, demonstrating different techniques, how they are protecting their businesses in this such situation. So as said, I just wanted to briefly touch with the figures that how it is important to, working with and working for small businesses. 75% of India's workforce depend on heat exposed labor. So this is really, reflect, importance to how our adaptation and mitigation measures needs to cover them. India's national government is working with 23 heat wave prone states and over 130 cities and districts. So this is really, initiated very well, because without this, we cannot, move effectively. So this is first and the most important aspect. For example, having heat action plan, then after only we can move more actively and to reaching out the required people and agencies. The loss of labor hours due to heat stress is really, increasing, and the frequency is also increasing. So the exposure is high. And for that purpose, we have to address different demands that coming out from these small businesses. India is expected to lose the equivalent of 34 million full-time jobs in 2030 as a result of heat stress. That is what ILO is saying. So while working with small businesses, while asking them, and they are reflecting their assets, and they are saying that their body is their asset and heat damages that asset. And it's really, reflect as, different experience already shared in the first presentation. And while AIDMI is working in with different small businesses, varieties of small businesses in different location, whether it is floodplain or whether it is coastal region, or it is like Ahmedabad or Lucknow, where we have found the exposure is really high. It is really, affecting their day-to-day life and their income. So we have to have, there is no any other option for developing countries like India to, reaching out this, addressing the demand of small businesses. So we started work, and in fact, AIDMI is supporting small businesses, whether it is about loss and damage in post extreme heat days and weeks, as well as also as anticipatory action. But here more we are, learning from small businesses what they are their key action. One is adjusting work hours and patterns. So they are not waiting, but they started based on their level and their exposure and their access to different mechanisms. So the most bigger one point coming out is adjusting work hours and patterns. Another one is modifying workspaces and environment. This is also, very commonly coming out from our conversation with these small businesses in different 8 locations within India. And this is really important that supporting businesses to have small measures such as having cool surface, having cool roof, and access to safe drinking water during extreme heat days and week is really important. And these small businesses require these things. Same way, it is not only about the measures directly, but it is also about soft measures like education. Many times, because of their economic situation, their high focus on day-to-day earning. On the other side, how this extreme heat affecting their bodies and how they themselves can, what are the measures they themselves can take. It's really important to reaching out them through different educational, and especially it is not like outside expert, but it is more about peer-to-peer learning that AIDMI is promoting, that while not outside expert, but how small business themselves supporting each other and sharing their experience about adaptation and mitigation. That is very much important. That's what AIDMI is also doing in these 8 locations. These are the 3 key aspect immediately coming out from their adaptations and aspects from extreme heat. So there are a number of adaptation, and the demands are coming from these small businesses, whether it is about infrastructure, how this infrastructure can have more adaptation and mitigation measures. There are different technology, artificial intelligence, different apps that reaching out them, how they can have access to early warning forecast of extreme heat. Same way, it is also about the heat action plan that addressing the health and other needs of these small businesses. It is also important in terms of management and planning point of view. Capacity building aspect is very important, but not visible. So many times it is neglected, but it's required, during the initial stage. So there are a number of such types of adaptation measures that AIDMI started responding with its partners and stakeholders. There are 5 points we would like to share based on our experience. Number 1 is recognize the heat wave as a disaster is very important. Like, for example, in the response of flood and cyclone, we have seen that how these small businesses reached out by even government and non-government for through different microfinance measures and the other protection measures. Same way, heat wave is required, because now it is not about extreme heat days, but it is now becoming extreme heat weeks. So that is very important. Provide clarity on funding for heat action plan. It is very important how this heat action plan, if prepared very effectively, same way that it is also required funding mechanism for implementation, and then only these small businesses can be reached out effectively. Promote climate responsive cooling techniques. You all know that different municipality and government organization have taken several measures for these small businesses, while they're providing, sometimes they are issuing license, so it is formal identification, ownership. Same way, they are also providing specific space in terms of areas for their businesses. So same way here also, it is about how this infrastructure and equipments can be climate responsive cooling techniques. Making decision making data driven, especially with small businesses, because it's lacking, data is lacking, because in the data design itself it is not addressing. So it is very important, and AIDMI started this, and we also would like to encourage and strengthen this mechanism. Implement and measure the impact of innovative solution through pilot projects. There are a number of projects, even this panel itself reflecting very important different pilots. For example, loss and damage and anticipatory actions with small businesses by AIDMI, heat index based this insurance by SEVA for women members, and same way in upcoming other presentations. So these require more and more numbers so that it can be upscale and wide scale. Thank you so much. Looking forward for further discussion. Over to Susmaji.
Thank you so much, Vishal. I think it was very interesting. Something that I kind of pinpoint is learning from small businesses. It tells us the importance of targeted interventions rather than just big policy plans. And we also go back to the bottom of the pyramid approach or theory of change, what we call it. Like we start from the bottom, even with data and design. I think that's what we are talking about here, that we go back to the bottom of the pyramid again. I'll give it to Mr. Khayal Trivedi from Hoisa.
Thank you, Sushma. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. I'll share my screen. Just a moment. Can you see the full screen, or do you still see the browser? Anyways, so I think I'll thank you so much for these presentations before. I mean, Vishal Bhai, and from Seva as well, and Mehulji. Such grounded and such humbling work that has been happening also in the sector on the ground, and which is great to learn and draw from. So I'm going to present a bit about HOISA, which is the Humanitarian Observatory Initiative of South Asia, which began last year in 2023, early last year. And the idea was that it was a global movement in the sense of re-looking at the humanitarian sector with the idea of how can we observe it differently. And when I say observe it differently, it also means that different perspectives at different levels, from community to city to state to national to international levels, because there is a lot to be done there. So I mean, so when this idea of humanitarian observatory began, it came up last year, and it is now actually happening in South Asia, which HOISA is running, but also in Ethiopia, in DRC, in Colombia, in Europe, in Southeast Asia. So there is a massive movement happening all across. HOISA, since last year, has been focusing on the case of extreme heat waves in South Asia. So it began with a series of panel discussion that happened with multiple stakeholders, multiple speakers, from people working on the ground to international agencies to SDMAs and NDMAs of each of the countries in South Asia, and also learning from other cities in Europe and the US. So the idea is also to have this cross-sectoral, cross-level approach where we are looking at heat waves, particularly from different perspectives, and to learn from each of them. It's not more, I wouldn't say it's more of a bottom-up or top-down approach. It's more of an approach that an observatory has while looking at different aspects of the humanitarian sector, again, talking about heat waves in this case. So I can, of course, go into details about why observations are necessary, but I'll be very brief there because this can be a huge discussion as well. But it's important to have different observations because the question of who observe matters a lot, and why. And that is also why it's important to break that power hierarchy and to keep on including different voices, different perspectives, different observations, to have a more inclusive approach to things. Because what also happens is that in a very policy and project-driven sector, that this sector becomes often, it becomes very limited. And so how to include most number of voices and feed in that data and that information into the system so that it can actually help everyone, which is where I think, Vishal Bhai, your presentation of discussing about what we can learn from these communities which are adapting to themselves to the heat waves is wonderful, because that's also something that we're learning from and also integrating to our larger policies and larger ideas of working in adapting to extreme heat waves. Now, coming, I'll just skip to the next slide and probably focus more on this one. But coming to the extreme heat waves in South Asia, and to understand the challenges, we also must understand short-term and long-term strategies, but as well as loss and damage happening in both spheres, short-term and long-term. And what interventions can we come up with at different levels from different perspectives. So it's hard to sort of summarize and put together all of those 5-6 panel discussions that have happened, but in a very simple way, I would say that at different level, different approaches are happening in South Asia, organically or also in terms of policies and by governments. So at the community level, I think what Seva also presented is very relevant, that what is happening on the ground coming from the people itself. I would also cite an example of Delhi and Ahmedabad both. Mehul Bhai spoke about the urban heat island effect. There was also research which happened in Delhi about the same thing, which identified areas where we can observe this kind of an effect because of the concretization of the cities. And as we observe those demographics and when we map cities, we realize which are those areas. And they're often areas which are low income groups and where informal settlements live. And that tells you a lot about the politics of the city, of the country, and also of how we have to prioritize certain sectors, certain areas more than the others, because the problem lies there. And of course, while talking about mitigating in that sense that loss that is currently happening, we also must prioritize the areas, but also look at how can we do that, again, short term and long term. So it's always a question of what we can do it immediately as a relief, but also what needs to change over a period of time to then make our cities, make our villages, of course, and our spaces more adaptive to extreme events such as heat waves. We also learned a lot from the appointment of the chief heat officer, which happened in Dhaka in Bangladesh. Bushra Afreen, we had a panel discussion on that, which was quite interesting because she shared about how difficult it is to, because often, again, in humanitarian sector, where there are multiple agencies, international organizations, NGOs, CSOs working on the ground, some of them, of course, collaborate, but some of them also work in silos to each other. So when so much of work is happening in the sector from different perspectives, from the municipality to the government to these agencies, how to somehow find a way that we can coordinate with each other to then apply or implement a more effective approach to dealing with the situation. So the chief heat officer there in Dhaka is actually appointed by the municipality, but also is constantly working with different communities and agencies to then coordinate and to prioritize things and have that exchange, because this also happens is that often with certain settlements, certain communities, when you come up with an idea as an external, and then you approach them and then present them this idea that, hey, we should do this as a solution to the extreme heat that you're facing. There is resistance to that because the solution is not coming from them. You're an outsider. So to break that barrier also is important. And that's why the idea of working with everyone together comes in. So I remember, of course, that in her presentation, she shared about that the biggest challenge in dealing with the situation is also to get data, because there are various forms of data available at various levels. Of course, there's data available with the governments at the municipality level, but there are also data available with different agencies working on the ground conducting surveys. Is that public or not? So, and who owns that data? So that's another problem of how to make sure that you have this open, transparent system of data, because that is what you'll feed your research and your policies on. And that is where also this idea of coming up with a chief heat officer of each city plays a crucial role in mediating that. So they have been doing some crazy and some really good work there in Dhaka, which I'd like to congratulate definitely. Moving forward from there, we also learned that the heat action plans that have come up over the past decade, starting from Ahmedabad, of course, at each city, but also at the SDMA and the NDMA levels, it's important to, as I said earlier, to focus on short-term and long-term strategies. And when I say short-term, of course, it's not just about relief, and as Vishal Bhai pointed out, changing working hours, and also giving them products or tools that can sort of help them deal with the extreme heat, but also looking at how is the construction of the city happening? How are we planning the cities? Are there enough water bodies? Are there enough canopy cover? Because the data also says that you need to have at least 30% of canopy cover in any area to have a significant change in the temperature. And if that is not there, which is what we are seeing, is that some areas are just hotter than the others because of the inadequate or poorly planned cities. So we must also look into that. Again, that's not going to happen overnight. It can take decades and decades of work in combating that thing. But those policies, those different perspective and very clear strategies have to be in place. That what is an immediate, what is a short term in the sense of over few months, and what is a long-term strategy that we have, and how that can be passed on from, because in long-term strategy, this is also the problem, that how can you continue the work over a long period of time when people keep on changing their positions, which is what was also, which came up in one of the discussions then. There's a lot of work also happening in Pakistan on anticipatory response on cooling, because in coming years, especially in the 2030s, the amount of expenses that the amount of fund that will go into just cooling the cities will be immense, will be huge. So coming up with, again, green initiatives of how can we create more and more cooling hubs, cooling zones to provide relief to people is more important. Bushra from Dhaka also highlighted that to have small little cooling hubs in the city for informal workers working outside is more important because it's only 2 to 3% of the population in South Asia, or very few at least, who have access to air conditions. So that's still very far off. What we need to also think of is that what kind of cooling measures we can provide immediately to people in the cities when the temperatures hit more than 40 degrees. From Nepal, we also learned that the heat waves impact differently in different regions. So what, of course, we have been experiencing in Pakistan, in Gujarat, or in Bangladesh is so much different than the heat waves occurring at higher altitudes. And also the same things are also often being observed there, because the concrete as a material being so cheaper and easily accessible, the new houses that are being built at those altitudes are no longer adapting to the changing climate. And so that is what they're facing again, that they're not just losing their indigenous knowledges and heritage of building structures which are in sync with the climate, but instead it's becoming worse with all the concrete coming up. And that also causes a loss of not just impact on your bodies, on your economies, but also on your loss of cultural heritage, because these architectures also come from responding to the climate. And if you also completely remove that in a very capitalist way, then you also lose a lot of cultural heritage there. So that was a very relevant case, which also came up from Nepal, which is to be learned from that. When we're thinking about infrastructure to be built in our environments, regardless of which city it is, it must respond to its environment, to its surroundings, to its weather patterns, because if it doesn't, then that infrastructure will actually cause more damage in future than helping us. And learning from international experiences. So for example, in Athens, we had Lenyo Mirvili, who spoke a lot about, again, coming back to the mapping of the cities, because when she started work in the Athens, there was no map, there was no data. So immense amount of work happened on just analyzing the mapping of the city itself. And they created a heat map. And while analyzing the data, they of course took all the past data of when heat waves had occurred. They fed all of that data into an algorithm, which completely took in factors and data from the city itself. So again, that algorithm is very specific to Athens as a city, because it's learning from its past experiences. It doesn't take all the data from around the world, but specifically Athens and the city itself. And it gathers those knowledges, those data, to then produce a heat wave categorization measure where they created 3 categories. And based on the categories, they could take certain measures. And because until that point, there was no way of measuring, okay, which category this heat wave belonged to and what must be the approach in this particular case. And when they did that, they realized that they could divide those strategies, those short-term and immediate strategies, along with those categories, to then provide relief immediately, which also kind of falls in the same line as what we learned from SEVA and what they're doing about the moment temperatures hit a certain degree, certain relief has to be immediately provided to them. While also mapping the city in terms of the heat maps, they realize also, again, coming back to the same point, that the areas which were hotter, which created more heat, were again informal settlements, because there were less green cover there. And of course, the areas which were more or less better, they were in a more richer areas of the city itself. So there's a lot to learn from that. And they also then came up with the idea of, okay, fine. So in extreme heat waves, if some measures have to be taken, and if you have to send out ambulances to people who need it, what route they must take to reach there as soon as possible. Because again, denser the areas, higher the heat, more precautions you have to then combat these situations. I think I'll try to wrap it up soon, because this can go on and on. But briefly, I think the idea is also to learn a lot from different communities. So not just from policymakers, people working on the ground, but also from scientists, from researchers working in this particular field. There was a great presentation which also happened by, I'd like to cite Sri Krishna Achyuta Rao from IIT Delhi, who has written an article about the future of heat waves. And rightly so, he predicts that based on the models and the data models that he had, that we will have heat weeks, as rightly Vishal Bhai said, and that the number of extreme heat days is just going to increase. So it's not about the temperatures will hit higher, but it's more about that those high temperatures will remain for a longer period of time, which can impact much more and in a very different ways. So again, how does that impact you immediately, but also long term to your body, and what must you do to mitigate that? And based on that, you can also learn a lot from very quickly again how that extreme heat impacts other disasters happening also. What does that do to the cyclonic patterns? What does that do to the monsoon cycle? What does that do then to the floods that happen immediately? And so what we're looking at is not just extreme heat waves in South Asia, but we're looking at cascading events happening one after the other. So one, the humanitarian sector has to come up with some solution of how to adapt to this change of extreme heat wave, but not just extreme heat wave. It's multiple events happening at the same time, which is very daunting. But that also requires a very collaborative approach of working with different people, and not just looking at one particular event, but the whole societal structure that we have established. This would then require us to collaborate with scientists, to collaborate with engineers who are working with artificial intelligence, to then again creating systems of early warning systems and forecasting. We must work with policymakers and governments because they have to be on board for these things. Otherwise, you can't really implement long-term strategies and ensure enough funding required for the sector. But you also, and most importantly, have to learn from communities on the ground, because the indigenous knowledges that they have, the measures of adaptation that they have, is often not accounted for. And that is also where decoloniality comes in, because if you want South Asia in that sense to be decolonial, we must learn from the people working on the ground and how they're adapting to situations, instead of just implementing our ideas of what solutions of extreme heat waves could be. So yeah, these are just some of the thoughts. Of course, each of those things that I cited out can go into longer discussions, but I will stop there and give it back to you, Sushma. So yeah, over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Cal. Thank you so much for sharing examples and initiatives. I think what we're seeing here is an exchange of ideas, and what we're looking forward is partnerships and collective actions. And I will hand over to Mr. Abhiyan Tiwari from NRDC, post that we can have concluded remarks from Mr. Mehul Pandya.
Yeah, thank you, Sushma. Please confirm if I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
Thank you. Can I share my screen?
Yes, please.
I think the host has to allow me for screen sharing. Yeah. Confirm if my screen is visible.
Yes, it is.
All right, thank you so much. So thanks again to the organizers, particularly ADMI, which we have been associated with since long. So I mean, there is very less left for me to cover now. The previous speakers, starting from Mehulji, to Dr. Joshi, Khayal, and I mean, everyone covered almost all aspects of heat waves, rising temperature. So I'll not get too much into the detail. I'll be just sharing some of the experience that we as an organization have working on this topic in India. So I come from an RDC India. It's headquartered in Delhi in India, but its main headquarters is in USA, United States. It's a non-profit. NRDC stands for Natural Resources Defense Council, and has been working on the area of climate change, environment, policies, pollution, public health, equity, and such issues for more than 5 decades in US and other parts of the world. And in India, we have been working for more than a decade now. We started working in India back in 2008-9. I need not to dwell into the basics that temperatures are rising. Most of our speakers are from Gujarat, so they can relate with it. I would urge everyone to frequently visit this particular site and see how their local region has been warming. But what does this small change in the average temperature means? The small change in the average temperature means we will be having more heat and more extreme heat days as compared to equally distributed, heat and cold and extreme heat days in future. And what does that mean? That means millions of people are more exposed to extreme heat days as compared to past. And that exposure is also not evenly distributed. If we see India, countries like India and Southern Asian, global South has higher exposure. And the same trend can also be seen in heat-related deaths. Hundreds and thousands of people in region, particularly from where we come, South Asia and Southeast Asia, hundreds and thousands of deaths are attributable to extreme heat. And the future projections are also alarming that in 2 degrees Celsius warming scenario, by mid of this century, there could be 370% increase in heat-related deaths. So these are concerning, numbers. This code red for health called by the Secretary General of UN, and again he called it an era of boiling. I mean, the era of global warming is over, and we are now living in the era of boiling. So these are some alarming, statements, and which is no more a future, but already a reality that we are experiencing. Not just on health, it also affects the economy. Potential labor hours lost due to heat are increasing by every passing year. Billions of labor hours are lost, and again, countries with low HDI and medium HDI countries are having higher losses compared to the high and very high HDI countries. And also, if you go by the sector, agriculture is the sector where the maximum loss in the labor hours has been experienced. And India, as we know, is an agrarian country, experiences huge losses. The previous speakers already talked about the recent ILO reports, but the main point, key highlight is that if the occupational safety and health standards are implemented rigorously, it can help in saving billions of dollars that could be lost because of the loss in the labor due to exposure to heat. So, nearly 2.4 billion workers, which stands for nearly 70% of the working population of the world, is exposed to excess heat. But in that also, more than 60% of the world's population, world's employed population, are in the informal economy. What does that mean? There are, limited regulations. There are limited provisions. They can be regulated because they come from the informal, economy. And this number is even higher in India. 80% of India's workforce comes from the informal sector. A report in 2018 highlighted that of those, 80% also, I mean, of those working population which comes from the informal sector, 82% of working women in India are in informal sector. So majority of women who are again vulnerable are coming from the informal sector and are engaged in the work like domestic work, construction work, street vending, which are not regulated as the formal sector or formal jobs are being regulated. Another aspect, Mehulji already talked about it, we need to think about is the urban aspect. So this year itself, more than, India experienced more than almost 536 heat wave days, which was highest after 2010. And over 44,000 suspected heat stroke cases were reported by National Center of Disease Control. Not just health, but also there was huge demand on power supply, because of which we saw power outages, and demand on the crops and water levels, water reservoirs. The concern about city is that one of the recent study showed that the cities are warming at twice the rate compared to the rural areas. So that again makes it a bigger concern, because when we talk about cities are warming at twice the rate we are urbanizing, by mid of this century, there will be 70% population across the world that will be nearly living in the urban settlements. And the good part here is that for that future 70% urban population, 60% of infrastructure is yet to be built. So we still have a scope of building our future cities more urban, heat resiliently. One of the example that has been often talked about, the Ahmedabad heat action plan. NRDC has been proudly associated in developing this heat action plan with the local municipal corporation, local municipal government, and other local knowledge partners such as Indian Institute of Public Health, Gandhinagar. And I'm glad to recognize Mr. Meerbhat sir, who is also the director of AIDMI, but was also the senior advisor for CDKN, which supported this work, this pioneering work. So this was the first heat action plan of South Asia that came in place in 2013 after a devastating heat wave experience that the city of Ahmedabad had. And the city decided to, work on this is pertinent issue and come up with a comprehensive local tailor-made plan, which has, simpler solutions, early warning systems, and interagency coordination. So when we talk about nodal officers, here is the nodal officer, which has who has the key role to play in coordinating all the actions once the early warnings are received from the meteorological services. Public awareness and community outreach. There are two distinguished uh, uh, features here. Public awareness is general public awareness, which goes throughout the summer season, and community outreach is reaching out the targeted communities with targeted messages and interventions. Then building capacity of the initially medical professional, but then other key stakeholders as well. For example, education department, labor department, transport department, which are engaged uh, uh, with the exposed population. So, building their capacity. And then lately, fourth intervention was added, which was reducing heat exposure and promoting adaptive measures in the plan. The plan got significant impact. A peer-reviewed study found that after implementation of Ahmedabad heat action plan, the city was able to avoid more than 1,100 heat-related deaths annually. So this became a significant finding, and got scaled with the support of national agencies like NDMA, India Meteorology Department, the Health and Family Welfare Department, to 23 states across the country. And NRDC has been providing technical support to national agencies throughout this journey of scaling the heat action plans. But what we often see is the plans are missing to address the vulnerabilities, particularly. For example, in Ahmedabad heat action plan, again, city of Ahmedabad itself, when we looked at the daily, all-cause mortality and daily temperature data of past 31 years, from 1987 to 2017, we found that women in general are at high risk of mortality due to temperature. Certain age groups, for example, younger children, elderly were at high risk. Even the city is divided in different municipal zones. The zones with higher, population density, higher built-in environment density, for example, the central zone, and the zones with higher industrial and slum areas, for example, south zone. The risk of mortality in those zones were higher compared to the other zones. One of the recent study after, all this journey of more than 10 years of heat action plans in India, one of the recent study found that more than 67% of heat action plans lack the localized hazard mapping, which means they do not incorporate the local thresholds for the early warning systems. Because what is 45 degrees Celsius temperature experienced in Churu is totally different from what is 45 degrees Celsius temperature experienced in Pune. So there has to be a local, threshold aspect in the early warning systems of the heat action plan. Then again, as I said, 95% of the heat action plans lacked, vulnerability or heat risk mapping. So those were some of the key findings that were highlighted in this study, which we decided to, work upon. So one of the recent work in the city of Jodhpur, which is a tier 2 city. And why a tier 2 city? See, there is a limited scope for major cities like Delhi, Bangalore, Mumbai, to do the retrofitting. But the tier 2 cities are the growth engines. They are yet to grow. They are growing. They'll be the future big cities, and that is where we can engage with the cities and ensure heat resilient development for future. So community engagement has been highlighted by many speakers earlier. So this was one of the example where the heat action plan took a bottom-up approach. So the local, our local technical partner there, Mahila Housing Trust, they have been operating in the city of Jodhpur for past more than a decade. They engaged with their communities, vulnerable communities, did some demonstration work, held the consultation with the local municipal corporation, presented their work with the community on passive cooling solutions and other interventions, and then city demanded for a comprehensive heat action plan for the city. So it was an example, demonstration shown by the grassroots organization, and then presented it to the city, and then city demanded a comprehensive heat action plan through series of consultation with the key stakeholders within the city. One of the thing that was missing in most of the heat action plan was covered in this heat action plan. The city is divided in 80 different wards. So a ward level heat risk assessment was done, comprising of more than 14 indicators, including percentage of women population in a particular ward, access to health centers, and many such different indicators were taken into the consideration. And city came up with a comprehensive ward level heat risk indexes, which were very useful in deploying the solutions. Another thing we often see is the gap in the early warning systems. The early warnings do come from the authorities, but it doesn't reaches to the communities, to the most marginalized community that needs that information the most. So how to take that information to warnings and alerts to those communities which actually need it the most. So for that also, the community tried, innovative solutions. Once the alerts are received to the nodal officer, they were passed to the community action groups, and those community action groups then translated it into the local languages and circulated it through different banners and different WhatsApp groups to all the vulnerable communities living in the slum settings. These are again some of those community awareness examples. We often think that they are illiterate and may not be able to read it, but they are so smart that they can actually figure it out from the pictures on the wall, that what exactly does these awareness paintings are trying to convey. So these are some of the initiatives that were taken. One coal roof, it is women were trained to deploy such solutions at their households, and they were trained to do it, which was also providing them an income generating option. Such solutions has already been done in many other cities also. One of the innovative solution that was again introduced in Jodhpur heat action plan this year was this net zero cooling station, which can accommodate at a point more than 40 people at one given point. And how does it work? Let me try to play this video. Yeah, so this is one of the solutions that was deployed this year, and the city government again is so impressed with such kind of solutions that they are, ready to invest into the heat action plan and also scale such solutions across the city in different localities where there are high footfalls. So this is in just one given year, the first time Jodhpur heat action plan was launched in 2023. And in 2024, the city is ready to invest for 2025. So this is an achievement, how you make the plans institutionalized through partnerships. The cooling center has obviously shown effectiveness. The average temperature was 7.73 degrees Celsius lower in the cooling station compared to the outside. And if I talk about the peak hour, it was almost more than 12 degrees Celsius temperature within the cooling center was lower compared to the outside temperature. So yeah, the good part is that countries with effective, early warning systems and detection and disaster, management plans have 8 times lower mortality rates from disasters, but there is yet to be a lot to be done. We need yet to, reach out the most vulnerable groups and understand their treasury and ensure that we protect them first. I think, yeah, that was my last slide. Thank you. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Arvind. I really hope that we have a couple of more minutes to address our question and answers. I think we are open. You can type your questions on the chat or just raise hands.
Can I ask a question, please?
Yes, sure.
Uh, so I have a couple of questions. The first one's for Dr. Rajvi, if she's here with us. Ma'am, in the presentation, you had spoken about the parametric insurance product, which was very interesting, how it was piloted. And what I wanted to know was, is there any scope of linkage with any existing government scheme for that insurance program that Seva is running for small and informal businesses?
That is something, Kshitijji, we are presently exploring.
Okay.
And there are ongoing interventions and ongoing conversations as well. We can keep you posted as and when we get updates on that.
Great, wonderful. Ma'am, another thing that I wanted to ask was that you'd spoken about in the lessons learned slide that there is a need to have a comprehensive insurance that covers not only heat wave risk, but the risk of all other kinds of hazards and disasters. So, ma'am, if we're talking about a parametric insurance product, what kind of triggers do you see? Because there are other organizations that are also trying to work out certain thresholds that when they are breached, only then insurance products can come into play. So if you're talking about floods or cyclones, or for that matter, sickness or epidemics as well, what kind of triggers is Seva thinking about to include in that comprehensive risk insurance cover?
There is a lot of literature review on having a parametric insurance product which covers multiple climate shocks. So, for example, in terms of cyclone, there can be wind speed that can be taken into consideration. In terms of floods, we can take rainfall. But it needs to be reviewed based on the availability of local data. That if I'm talking about rainfall, what needs to be the amount of rainfall and what needs to be the time period that needs to be defined. For example, for a city as big as Ahmedabad, 100 mm of rain in a span of 3 to 4 hours might not be as harmful as 100 mm of rain in a span of 3 hours is for a small town like Anand. So there needs to be a lot of back and forth, a lot of data needs to be gathered on local basis, because this is another drawback, Kshitiji, that at present the data we have or the satellite we have is at a greater distance and there are no local weather stations available. For example, if there is excessive rainfall episode in a salt pan, the data I will get is from Surendranagar weather station, which is about 20 to 25 kilometers away from the actual event place. So these are the small nitty-gritties we are presently working on, and we have some experts on panel who will be guiding us. So let us see how the product comes out to be.
Great, great. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you. I have a lot more questions for all the other panelists, but I want others to, I don't want to eat away other people's time to ask questions. So I'll just hold my peace for now.
You can either raise hands, write a question on the chat box, or just speak it out loud. Okay, so I don't think we have question on chat box yet.
Oh, so can I go ahead and ask questions? I just have two more. If there is still time left, I don't want to impose.
We have, it's 5:29, but I think we can borrow 2-3 minutes more.
Okay, so very quickly, wanted to first congratulate Khayal for that lovely presentation. It was very interesting. What I wanted to ask was how is Hoysa seeing the public perception at the local level in a tropical hot country like India about heat waves play out? I mean, there is enough evidence from the ground, and my personal work with AIDMI has also shown that people at the city level who work outside, they don't actually consider heat to be that big of a risk in their perception, because they have been living with heat for all their lives, because India is a hot country after all. And it's only when certain thresholds are breached that health crises actually happen. So since Hoysa is in the business of observing these things, I wanted to know what kind of public perception have you noticed? And B, if there is a need to change it, what do you suggest that we should do with work with such, how should we work with such communities to change this perception?
Thank you, Shudit, for that wonderful question. I'm not sure how I can perfectly answer that question. I mean, I think what you rightly pointed out, that a lot of people, again, coming from South Asia, the problem of heat has always been there, and people are pretty adaptive to these measures when it comes to day-to-day life. So that amount of, to some extent, the resilience, that adaptation is there. The question about how worse, because the thing is that Hoysa is positioned also in a space where it's instead of, it's more trying to involve different people. So for example, Dr. Rajvi, in that sense, who really rightly pointed out the findings of SEVA on the ground. So it's more positioned in the sense that we invite stakeholders, speakers who are working at different sectors, who have information and access to people on the ground. So we, of course, haven't had, or we don't directly, we have conducted surveys, but not that much on the ground that I can really say on behalf of how people or larger people perceive the particular problem and how they engage to that. We try to through people who engage with them. Because HOISA, again, as its entity, it's more of a platform of exchange than an organization that conducts these things on the ground. So we work with organization that conducts these things on the ground as opposed to us doing it ourselves. Having said that, I also must say that the problem is also that in these discussions that often happen that we've always faced, and that's the challenge, I think, for the sector also. When we are trying to include different voices, different takes, different perspectives on any problem or on any extreme events, for example, the heat waves in this case, the issue is also that the language that we speak, who is speaking it, often becomes a barrier itself. So in order to be truly inclusive and to have those perspectives from the ground, it has to be very focused onto a particular aspect in a particular space. Because, for example, if we have invited speakers from different international organizations, as well as people working on the ground, and the medium of language is English, then that becomes a problem. Because, of course, you will not have people comfortably saying their thoughts out loud. So being inclusive is this, or at least understanding what people's perspectives are as a larger audience, requires also a lot of trial and error experiments with language, with the format, with people that we are inviting. So it varies a lot. But in general, I do agree that this discussion or these discussions that are happening in this space, or also that has been happening with HOISA in general that I can speak of, needs to reach out to larger audiences. And that is a challenge in itself. Of course, there are ways to do it, with that we are trying to engage with more universities, with more schools directly, to engage young people also into this whole discussion, because that's what we want. The problem is also that these discussions often remain in this sphere of humanitarian workers and policymakers, or people who have researched in this, but not the person on the ground facing it. So it's always a second-hand information that we get, unless, of course, we change our methods and have multiple languages and different ways of reaching out. So that's just my brief. I'm not sure if I answered correctly to your question, but this is where I come from, at least, if that answers. Yeah.
No, thank you. You did answer my question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cal. Thank you so much, Shitij. But I think we are out of time. I think it was an amazing, amazing conversation, and we want to share more. And I'm so sorry, Mehul sir, I might have to cut short your thank you note here, but we have already run out of time, and I think I will skip to that bit. But we can all discuss after this particular panel, and we have all our numbers and everything. But yes, I want to thank Lens Hub for the opportunity and all of you for your participation in today's panel discussion. And I think it will inspire further action and collaboration as we continue working towards building local resilience to climate change. One more thing before we close, I think AIDMI will be reaching out to the speakers to collaborate on a joint blog based on today's discussion and focusing or aligning with loss and damage and anticipatory action. We will also be sending you a brief shortly to get started. But yes, I think we should keep this going and keep the discussions going around the heat wave and all other climate hazards again. And thank you once again for your time, and I look forward to seeing the positive impact of today's effort. Back to Ekad if they wish to.
Right. Thank you so much,
Thank you
everyone.
all. I would like to ask everybody to turn their camera on so that we can take a screenshot before ending the meeting. Thank you.
Thanks to Resilience Hub. Thank you, Adiba and the team, for really effective communication efforts.
Who is taking the picture? Please let us know when it is done.
I think
Okay, we are
that's-
done taking the picture.
Thank you so
Perfect.
much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
for joining.
Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Thank you.
ICA team.
Bye-bye.